All right, wonderful. It is the top of the hour, so we'll get started here. Welcome to our regular webinar series. I'm James Okulo, Director of System Planning at ESIG, a membership-based nonprofit organization committed to providing our members with objective information, resources, and networking opportunities in support of the energy transition. We do this in a number of ways. We do this through workshops, tutorials, webinars, blogs, working groups, task forces, and producing a number of technical resource materials. ESIG also serves in a leadership role with the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, or GPST, whose mission is to bring together actors to catalyze a rapid, clean energy transition at unprecedented scope and speed. ESIG leads one of the 5 pillars, which deals with the research agenda for system operators. And more information on GPST can be found at globalpst.org. Our next in-person workshop, or workshops, plural really, will be June 13th through 15th in Denver, concurrently focusing on meteorology and market design for grid services and long-term load forecasting. More information can be found on our website, esig.energy, under events. Our workshops and webinars are open to everyone, so please feel free to register anytime on the ESIG website. If you're new to ESIG, I really strongly encourage you to follow up with us if you like what you hear, and I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised. You can find us on the web, again at esig.energy, as well as on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So a few logistics before we begin here. Uh, Please note that participant lines will be muted during the webinar. This is really just to limit some unnecessary distractions. And for the Q&A, we'll be using Slido at slido.com. Please go to slido.com and enter ESIG1, that is ESIG1, as the event code. The instructions are at the bottom of this screen as well. In addition, you'll see a thumbs up button next to the questions, and this allows you to cast a vote so you can help prioritize the questions submitted. We plan to reserve 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the discussion and then conclude at the top of the hour. In addition, an email with a link will be provided once a video has been posted. Yes, this meeting is being recorded and that video will be made available. We plan to provide short responses to any of the unanswered questions after the webinar. So please don't hesitate or be afraid to ask any questions through Slido. So today's topic is assessing the value of grid enhancing technologies, looking at the modeling, analysis, and business justification. Our speakers today will discuss the work and findings from the Transmission Optimization Grid Enhancing Technologies project, which is completed under subcontract to Idaho National Lab with funding from the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Electricity and the Wind Energy Technologies Office. In the coming years, the U.S. electric grid will face several challenges that will stress our existing transmission system. It will include the replacement of aging infrastructure, the increasing demand for power, and the push for clean and sustainable energy due to climate change. Grid enhancing technologies are technological solutions that can help by providing operational support while the needed larger upgrades to the transmission system are completed. This presentation will include the key topics and questions addressed by the INL TOGETs team and provide modeling and simulation examples of GETs, including dynamic line ratings and power flow controllers. We'll also use this opportunity, importantly, to announce the formation of a new user group focusing on grid enhancing technologies. So a little bit about our speakers. Jake Gentle is Senior Program Manager and Supervisor for Idaho National Lab's Secure and Resilient Renewables and Grid Integration portfolio. He leads a team through the development of technology and providing technical oversight by coordinating state-of-the-art and innovating solutions for the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy and the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability. Mr. Gentle also leads INL's Securing the Path to Net Zero initiative. Sean Morash is the Power System Consultant and Principal at Telos Energy. He has led client engagement with system-level analysis across North America for renewable integration, decarbonization, and reliability assessments. He specialized in conveying complex electric sector themes to a range of stakeholder audiences and engaging with clients as an expert witness on utility planning and ISO stakeholder processes around integrated system planning, system reliability, and many others. We'll also introduce Ken Donohoo, who will serve as the chair of the new user group. He provides subject matter expert advice and strategy to various entities. His broad expertise includes transmission and distribution system analysis and planning, electric system design, energy markets, and the design, development, and integration of various energy resources, including wind, solar, biomass, and storage. He has 40 years of related experience in increasingly complex supervisor and management positions, including significant experience in power system planning analysis, system operations, and resource planning for the ERCOT system. Welcome to our presenters. So once again, please use Slido if you have any questions. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump in here and get started. I'll turn it over to you, Jake.
Hey, thanks, James. I appreciate everybody for dialing in today. I also want to thank the Department of Energy, Office of Electricity, and the Wind Energy Technologies Office for making these types of studies possible through the funding they provide us. I also want to thank ESIG for really hosting us, allowing us to use this platform to convey some of our research and some of the results we found throughout the process, and then also taking the ball forward, really moving it forward with this user group. So I'll get our slides back up. Yeah. So again, you mentioned myself and Sean Morash. I also want to thank the rest of the INL team that really put a lot of hard work into this project. It's about a 2.5 year effort, and we'll kind of convey some of those results throughout this presentation. So today we're going to talk about kind of how did we get here, if you will. Where are we headed in terms of at the start of this project, how we built the project, and then kind of some of the results, really defining into that cost benefit analysis. And then we'll turn it back over to ESIG and launch into discussions around how the user group's going to work. Go to that next slide. Okay, so where did we start? This has been a journey for many of us, probably 15 plus years for those of us on the INL team. But really in the last 5 years, we've had a couple really significant opportunities to convey the value of, say, dynamic line rating and overall grid enhancing technologies. So in 2019, we released, or Department of Energy released the first of these reports centered on dynamic line rating. And then as we worked forward through that, another request came out where we focused on grid enhancing technologies. And we'll explain how grid enhancing technologies as a definition is outlined here throughout the project. Some of those recommendations from the 2022 report was really to assemble a task force. And the underlying focus of that task force would be to articulate and communicate grid enhancing technologies and share data. So we achieved that through the transmission optimization with grid enhancing technologies, or TOGETs project. And through that process, we picked up a lot of new team members, if you will, through the advisory board. Some of those operators come from, or some of those participants came from, say, grid operators like MISO, National Grid, WAPA, PJM, and BPA. We also looked at different research institutions like EPRI, power engineers, consultants like Internex and Telos, and then even some of our good friends at FERC, NERC, WEC, and others. So we appreciate the opportunity to build that advisory board. We spend a lot of time working back and forth to understand their interests and their desires as we went through the project. And then we settled in on a lot of ideas, a lot of really good ideas, and we can only execute some of them. And so this is one of those webinars where we're going to focus primarily on, say, the modeling and simulation effort. If we go to the next slide, you can find the rest of the materials from the TOGETs project and project materials that are continue to come out on our website. So I'll put it here in the chat. Appreciate if you could head out there. If this was social media, I'd say, click that like button or share. we get paid by the number of visits per site. No, just kidding. But we do track how many people visit the site. We do appreciate folks getting out there, using it. If you've got recommendations how to make the site better, or if there are missing materials that you thought would be valuable to host, let us know. There's lots of contact information out there on that website. And if you can't find what you're looking for, reach out. We'll try and either point you to it or get you in touch with others that may have that information. We have a lot of materials already on the site. Some of those are listed here, like the guide to case studies for grid enhancing technologies. We even put together a real-time and forecasted dynamic line rating use case document. We started to articulate different line rating forecast timeframes, built out an interoperability profile, and a handful of other materials. I also want to draw attention to a refresh on one of our older websites, focus more on dynamic line rating. This provides a lot of information over the last 10 to 15 years, links to other locations, industry partnerships, and different articles and papers. So when we think about grid enhancing technologies, I wanted to make sure that we all started with the same categorical definition. This really is something we've tried to stay consistent with. Throughout this particular project, we did add a little bit more resolution to contingency, or the loss of transmission components. And so throughout the project, again, we focused namely on ambient adjusted ratings, dynamic line ratings, and power flow control. We do acknowledge that storage technologies and other traditional line upgrades are potentially or possibly or should be considered in grid enhancing technologies as a definition. But this particular project really focused on power flow control and dynamic line rating. So why and what did we set out to achieve throughout this modeling simulation effort? I think the underlined piece here is results and benefits analysis. I think what we wanted to do is dig into something that could be shared publicly. So we worked towards a kind of a national model, or a nationally available model, internationally available model, the Grid Modernization Laboratory Consortium, RTS, or GMLC RTS model. It's kind of like an IEEE 13 bus or whatever bus model. And then we moved it over into an applied space, which is where we're going to show most of our results from today, which is from the ISO New England region of the country. There's three things that we really wanted to make sure we developed throughout this process. Again, we wanted to expand on that 2020 report to Congress technique, where we developed kind of a novel model to link economic and reliability transmission planning tools. We took it to the next level in this project, and we'll explain more about that here later. But ultimately, we want to consider the flexible nature of grid enhancing technologies. And we wanted to start identifying use cases and opportunities in which of those technologies provides the best value proposition. And ultimately, as part of the overall project, we're transmission constrained in many parts of the country. And so we're looking at all ways to achieve better access or remove some of those contingencies or congestion or curtailments. And so grid enhancing technologies is just one of those. We know it's not the silver bullet. We know it's not the only solution. And just traditional upgrades or even brand new lines, really at the end of the day, is another tool that everybody should still continue to pursue. Next slide there, Sean. Okay, so why? What was the main goal of this modeling simulation effort? I mentioned that one of the major outcomes was to basically integrate two modeling techniques. And so with this slide, we start to articulate what does that actually mean. So I want to turn it over to Sean for a minute here, introduce himself, but then also highlight some of the dashed line area and to what makes this effort so unique.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Yep, I'm Sean Morash. I'm with a company called Telos Energy. We do consulting in a lot of this space. So Telos was founded on kind of a concept around economic transmission planning and reliability planning, and need to be closer together. And at times they need to overlap. right? We need to have projects that use both disciplines to analyze kind of modern or new challenges. So we were really excited about this opportunity to pair kind of Plexos market simulation tool with a reliability planning tool called TARA that allows us to analyze AC power flows in post contingencies. So I should be clear here. I wanted to kind of say it up front and early that like the work that we're going to be presenting throughout this wouldn't be possible without the help of the rest of the guys on the Telos team, including Leonard and Andrew. And so I'm really proud of the work that they did and that we pulled together on this. So the core concept here, we think that gets as a scope falls, the value of them fall in between these two kind of transmission planning disciplines. And so in order to really assess the value, we need to look at both of them. So we wanted to flash kind of early in this webinar. You guys have been paying attention for 15 minutes and we haven't really shown any results yet or gotten into any of the methodology. And so we wanted to flash early, what are our results? What are we getting to? And so you can see here a chart that maybe takes you back at first. But what we're looking at is various grid enhancing technologies were evaluated across a number of metrics, including production cost savings and the value of renewable energy curtailment avoided. And generally those grid enhancing technologies seem to pay for themselves in a year or less. The traditional upgrade, meanwhile, integrates more renewables. It saves more money across production costs, but it also costs more. And so we lead into a situation where the economic payback for those maybe takes a little bit longer. Vic, did you have some other color commentary on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you dig in, you can kind of see where the noise is. And so what we're going to try and do is extract out what does that mean when we think about the combinations of power flow control plus dynamic line rating, having an adjusted rating, and then traditional upgrades. So we're gonna dig deeper into those bars there, but ultimately it kind of depends. I think we're always going to lean heavily on that depends because it's location specific. It's also situational specific and dependent. So what we want to do is give you kind of a big picture results up front. We've looked at various different scenarios and configurations, but ultimately it's your system, or it would be your system, and there are different techniques and different technologies that would provide variances into the results that we were able to model and simulate. And so at the end of the day, lean back on that, it depends. But at the end of the day, again, right, if you think bigger picture, there's some near-term solutions available. And I think it could alleviate some of those challenges, allow that almost immediate payback period in months, not years. And we think about that payback, it could even be just time. It doesn't have to be money. So think through what the rest of this presentation might look like. And again, ultimately, traditional line upgrades or even brand new lines is still important, still critical. So don't think about those as too negative. We're not saying grid enhancing technology is going to solve everything forever, but there is some immediate and near-term opportunities that I think we should all consider. Okay, so this particular slide should be familiar. It's the exact same slide that we've used as we presented on the report to Congress in 2022. I know many of the registrants for this webinar had some one-on-one discussions around that report, and so this should look very familiar. It's not the new part of the modeling approach that we took in this new project, but I wanted to remind you of how novel maybe it was at the time, 2 years ago when we first started that. But then also, if we go to the next slide, you get to really see we're starting to put some fidelity to the process. And I think what we're trying to achieve here is repeatability and then also standardization. We know that everybody kind of around the country, around the world, is going to get into some conversation where grid enhancing technologies comes up. how do they work? Where do you use them? What's the payback? What's the process? So throughout this project, we really wanted to ensure that it was well documented, that it was shareable, and it used standard techniques, standard approaches and tools. You may like something like Plexos or TARA, but you may also like different versions of those same types of tools. So at the end of the day, if you think about the purpose of this overall project, yes, we're going to try and articulate the results, but we also wanted to ensure that there's a standardized process. So when you're comparing results across the board, you can reference a process like this that allows you to communicate that effectively. Okay, and so ultimately, we wanted to make it real. I mentioned some GMLC RTS type modeling that we did to get the process worked out, get the bugs worked out, understand what the data sets needed to look like. But ultimately, we wanted to apply it to something real, something kind of nationally impactful. And when we think about offshore wind, and we think about the value proposition of pursuing a clean energy goal, we realize that there is going to be some stress in that eastern interconnection region, and it translates to other parts of the country as well. So when we moved forward, we wanted to revisit some of the work that we did in that report to Congress, dive deeper, ensure that the process continued to work, that the results we saw initially could be expanded upon, and then kind of leverage some new tools and new techniques. And so, Sean, I'll turn it back over to you to dig deeper into this.
Yeah, so this kind of pick a region type of thing for this analysis is kind of tricky because I think anywhere we look, and we look far enough into the future, we can talk ourselves into a problem, right? There's transmission constraints all over the place. But these kind of 6 key indicators for GETS value from the report that was released a year ago, 18 months ago, was helpful as we refreshed kind of, okay, how do we look for a spot where this stuff might matter, right? And so wind and solar, we're looking for curtailment, we're looking for congestion, we're looking for price differentials, really where there's a lot of activity. And so that pretty clearly leads to, hey, over the next 10 years, there's a lot of offshore wind that's going to be interconnected in this Rhode Island, Maine, Connecticut region of New England. And so kind of the more you study the near-term plans, the more obvious it becomes of kind of where the activity is, right? And I should be clear that ISO New England and lots of folks are working on this. There's multiple working groups doing rigorous analysis. Our effort is a little bit on the side of that, kind of intentionally as we're trying to assess how GETS might fit in and how we should think about that. So we've kind of zoomed in on this one little region down here, and we've built out a system for 2030, right? So an ISO New England system, nodally, that has a variety of changes to it, electrification impacts, but also a whole lot more offshore wind, right? So we go from a system that has 40% zero carbon generation to one that's about 75%. And so we built this out. We tried to stay as kind of realistic as possible for what, how we think ISO New England is going to go about, integrating all this new wind and all these changes in their system, with the recognition that some of this might change and, nobody knows exactly what 2030 is going to look like. So we've got a kind of an initial case. We think we've got something that is relatively representative of the near-term future for New England. And then we're going to say, hey, all right, did we capture that properly, right? Or is this a fairly secure system? And then, hey, ultimately, we're going to come back and we're going to run another market simulation with some new technology strategies that will hopefully alleviate some system constraints and will identify their value. So we've modeled a lot of this offshore wind power generation we leverage pretty heavily the system advisory model that's made available through NREL. That tool allows you to kind of pick your locations for your wind turbines, with historical wind in that region. And then you run that through a power curve to come up with an hourly profile for wind availability. And so the kind of combination of these highly granular resource characteristics paired with the resource plans, we're able to come up with this kind of hourly fidelity model that we can assess production costs and production environments. So we've got this kind of production simulation, this kind of simulation of what operations might look like in 2030. We're using a DC power flow in the production cost model Plexos. But we want to kind of double check if we're being secure with how those resources are dispatched to meet load, right? Are we accidentally glossing over some really key transmission congestion issues, really key transmission problems? And so we had a pretty rigorous process to better inform our operational analysis with an AC power flow simulation, right? And so this process, it's funny, it winds up in this graphic that looks pretty slick, but it makes it look simple. But really, there's like 5 round trip versions between Plexos and TARA where we're passing different dispatch hours, different system conditions across, over to the AC power flow tool. It's testing new things and saying, hey, yeah, I'm seeing the same stuff. You need to be worried about that. But also, hey, there's some new flow gates, some new things that maybe are really important to make sure are captured in the operational simulation, right? We don't want to overload one area and have a different area be susceptible to potential outages, right? So this kind of concept around N-1 planning is really important here. So we're working towards a conference paper on this topic, on kind of how to think through pairing an economic simulation that has 87, 60 hours for a given year with an AC power flow tool that really is set up to handle certain snapshots, certain hours. And it's not really prepared to talk through kind of the full year's worth of simulation. So anyway, we run through this kind of back and forth a few times. We end up with a base case that we're pretty happy with, that we think is a fairly secure dispatch condition, that we're not going to run into contingency events that lead to shortfalls or anything like that. So we've got this base case, we've got this kind of stable model, and so let's make sure we understand it, right? Let's take a look. Well, we've got some curtailment, and the more we look at it, man, most of this curtailment is for offshore wind at this one substation, Braden Point. Zoom in a little bit on that, and we see that there's not a constant line flow level where things get curtailed, right? It's all right at high wind output, there's curtailment that starts to happen, but there's some variability to that. So we want to zoom in a little bit more and say, all right, what is really going on at this substation that makes us have to have this curtailment, right? And so, all right, we look at the substation, it's got some 345 kV lines, it's got some 115. This is just part of the substation, so it doesn't tell the whole story. But we find that there's 3 primary flow gates that we're worried about. The one is fairly straightforward, where we're worried about the loss of one of the 345 kV lines can overload the other 345 kV line. We're also worried about, hey, the loss of one of the 345 kV lines going to overload the jumper on the 115 kV system as power tries to get north out of Brayton Point, right, as we try to get more of that offshore wind into the system. And then similarly, it's not just the line, it's one of the transformers can kind of lead to some overloads. So there's this dynamic situation where there's a variety of flow gates, there's a variety of kind of system interactions that lead to curtailment, right? This isn't just, man, we put too much wind on this at the substation. It's, you know, we've got too much wind at the substation under certain conditions with like different things that we have to worry about. So we've got a problem, right? We've got a couple 100 gigawatt hours of curtailment showing up at one substation at Brayton Point here in the center. And so we said, all right, you know, that's good from a modeling from the project perspective, because now we have something to potentially solve, right? We need some solution, whether that's traditional upgrades, maybe this is somewhere where DLR or AAR could fit in. So let's test it out, right? We know that there's a real opportunity here to integrate more wind, and we should see what the best solution might be, or a variety of solutions might be. So, all right, we've got a problem. We're gonna solve it. We're gonna put DLR on. Let's put it on these 345 kV lines that are coming out of the substation. We could get into how we calculate those DLRs. Jake can go for the whole rest of our session on how that's calculated. Anyway, we've got a profile of DLRs. We feed that in, and we've adjusted our constraints based on our new line limits, right? And so we're able to say, okay, man, we're able to go from like 430, something like that, gigawatt hours of system curtailment down like 100 gigawatt hours, down 100 gigawatt hours. Most of that is thanks to alleviating constraints on the 345 kV system, right? So sometimes there's curtailment that shows up because of constraints on the 115 kV system. Sometimes there's constraints all across the network, right? And so it's really interesting that our DLR and AAR help us the most with the 345 kV constraints. So hey, it's not just DLR that qualifies as a grid enhancing technology. It's also power flow controls, right? And so we needed to figure out where to put PFCs, and it's like not a totally straightforward question, because we've got this dimensionality problem where we've got a variety of different places where we can put them. We've got a variety of different contingencies that we care about. We've got 8,760 potential hours of dispatch where we could optimally place a PFC, right? So a PFC placed optimally for some low load hour in April might not be the optimal place to put it in July, right? So how do we co-optimize across all these different dimensions? We've got some fun charts on that. We're not going to get into here. But again, this is another space where we're going to put together a conference paper to really get into identifying an optimal PFC placement. So for the benefit of this webinar, we're just going to chat through. We've got this script that came from our AC power flow analysis that allowed us to identify 3 potential optimal locations for PFC placement. You can see here we've got the orange spot, the purple spot, the red spot, right? So all these come out of roughly the same area where we put the dynamic line rating. And they seem to help with curtailment. Just like how dynamic line rating improved our system curtailment, overall, we see that PFCs placed at each of the 3 different locations would help. Importantly, they help on the 345 kV system. That's where most of our constraint was. But also the orange PFC, the one that goes from Berry Street to Brayton Point in this example, you can see that, man, somehow there's more curtailment across the system with that PFC. When you think about it, that what we're doing with that PFC is we're shifting some of the power out of the 345 kV only, we're shifting it onto the 115 kV system. And so we're better utilizing the full system. And when we better utilize the full system, sometimes we run into constraints on the full system, right? So we've got a variety of different kind of PFCs, DLRs, and so pause, hold on. What's the kind of characterization here of how this works? Jake, I think you were gonna kind of chat through this one.
Absolutely. So, it's by no surprise that, some things are better together. But if you can look at just generically the color scheme here, location matters, and also kind of technique in which you deploy and utilize matters. This isn't meant to be earth-shattering. I think it's kind of just a quick summary, a snapshot of how did we come up with the kind of the thumbs up, thumbs down, or it's pretty neutral version of the results. Dynamic line rating in of itself did allow for some additional transmission capacity to be enabled or utilized, if you will. And then also power flow control and DLR allowed for better overall situational awareness and control. So we're pretty confident in the results that we saw, but it also aligns with what you would expect.
Yeah, did it pass the sniff test? So we've got the Getz case with PFC and DLR here, right? So we've got our DLR results from earlier where we showed significant curtailment improvement. It turns out in this case, the one we picked the optimal PFC out of the 3 that we tested. There's a little bit of improvement in curtailment, relative to DLR from that one. When we put both a PFC and a DLR out there, we've got even better, further improvement in our curtailment and our production costs and our system utilization. One of the really interesting things for me that came out of here was around this kind of interactive benefit where when we put the DLR and the PFC together, we're able to achieve more savings, more curtailment improvement, a couple of different metrics. That case with the paired kind of Getz had a better, more improved system utilization, better production cost than when we looked at just the DLR and we added that to just the PFC. Right, so when we look at PFC 1 and PFC 2, that was like 3 million in production cost savings. But then when we do the DLR plus PFC, we're looking at like 7 million, right? So when we stack those benefits, suddenly there's this kind of also an interactive benefit that appears. We should be careful though, right? That interactive benefit is not always present. And in fact, in one of the places that it made the most sense, it's not there. Next page. We also wanted to, before we kind of wrapped up this project, hey, let's anchor ourselves to a traditional upgrade. And it's pretty obvious in this case that we needed help getting the power out of this one substation. So we said, hey, let's put a new line in the existing right of way. That seems like a fairly straightforward traditional upgrade to alleviate some of the congestion that's there. And so when we do that, we come back to, hey, these are the results we chatted through earlier, where we've got the traditional upgrade is incorporating far more renewable energy, but it also costs significantly more. So that incorporation of renewable energy is a metric in itself, right? This is a region that has aggressive carbon goals, but then it's also reflected back into the production cost savings. So the report that we keep referencing, the 2022 report, was very careful to articulate multiple metrics to assess grid enhancing technologies and kind of power system dynamics in general. Similarly here, we want to be careful that it's not just one metric, it's kind of a whole system approach for how to assess these different options. And we're just doing an economic analysis here. There's multiple other considerations that should go on.
All right, so let's bring it home. All right, so we showed you part of this slide prior. We want to reemphasize the fact that there are some key insights from the project. And again, you can read, say, upcoming technical reports, a lot of the materials we've got out on the website. There'll be papers and journal articles, really defines and defends all of these analyses. But giving you the high level here, individual grid enhancing technologies can make an impact. I think that's okay, great. And then the value is highly system and congestion dependent. Okay, we understand that. And power flow control and dynamic line running together can be better than each individually. Interesting, right? Not to be too surprising, but we wanted to make sure that we bring it all home. And so when we think of the results, keep it high level, make sure you understand. And at the end of the day, we can give you all of the data, all of the models, all of the results you want, and the assumptions we made throughout the process. And I can see lots of conversations and chats and questions over here, so I'm looking forward to that. Anything last minute, Sean? Any last marks?
Yeah, I saw plenty of chats coming in too. No, the thing for me that I want to emphasize here is we placed a lot of the studies that have been done in this space say, hey, what happens if I blanket the region with DLR, or I blanket the region with these PFCs? And those typically show, yeah, there's a lot of benefit to that. But what we did here was a little different. We said, hey, what if we put one, what's the one PFC that makes the big difference, right? Let's dip our toe in. Or, hey, let's really targetedly apply DLR in places where it might have the greatest benefit. And I was skeptical when we started that we were really going to be able to make a difference. But the more we got into it, the more we assessed what was going on. Sure enough, there are real, annual savings numbers here. $10, $15 million in annual savings from any single PFC or DLR that could be, potentially placed there. So that was a real important takeaway for me, was you don't necessarily have to blanket the system with these things for there to be benefit. And then I was also really, proud of the team. We didn't get into it a ton in this webinar, but how those kind of two tools are paired, and making sure you really understand your congestion and understand your system before you go applying technologies, I think is, kind of a friendly reminder to the community. So with that, Ken, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, exciting information. So a lot of good Slido. Ken Donohoo here, representing ESIG and helping out with the INL effort on the GETs. And I'm happy to announce that we are forming a GETs user group to help move this along a little bit further and share a lot of information. Essentially, it is an exclusive forum for users and potential users. And it's going to be, the discussions are going to be private. and freely share the information back and forth. At the end of it, we will come out with a report on best practices and ideas, discussions, and maybe steps going forward. We're going to discuss best practices, maybe some challenges people are having. What are the benefits of it? Example one that I can think of here down in ERCOT could GETS help enable outage clearances. We're having a lot of challenges around that. Could that help enable some of the outages to either get maintenance work done or getting interconnections done? Could it speed up interconnections? Also, we'll be discussing the policy changes that have been going on around GETS. And again, it's primarily for staff and leadership of transmission and distribution utilities. They're eligible for membership. We are going to ask to limit 3 individuals per organization. Now, I know one of the first ones is, hey, what about the vendors? What about the consultants? Right now, we're trying to focus on the TDUs. We may invite them into meetings when we want to delve a little bit more into information, but right now, primarily, it's going to be TDUs. And yes, there is application at the distribution level. I think there is. I think it's going to be very important. Here's another one. I know a lot of people, hey, how much is this going to cost me? And utilities are really cost focused. Right now we have funding for the utilities to join. It's not going to cost you to join. And participants do not necessarily need to be an ESIG member. That's another factor on this. So why aren't you doing this is my question. Here's something else that I want to get into is why are people not doing this? I'd like to have that discussion in the user group. And again, it's in a protected environment. We're setting up regular virtual meetings, so it should be pretty easy to do. The length of those will be dependent upon the agenda that we come up with and what the members are interested in sharing or not sharing. And we're going to work on an annual in-person workshop. The first kickoff meeting is Tuesday, June 27th at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. So we've got a few weeks away, but please tell your friends. Now, how do you get into the user group? We set up a web page on the ESIG site, and you go there and register. That's also the place where we will post information at the same time, but that is essentially the link to get to us. By the way, all the consultants and vendors, pass this on to your TDUs. Say, hey, get involved in this. I've seen the list of people participating right now. It's really cool how many people we've got, but I'd like to really get more of the TDUs in this discussion, particularly the ones that aren't doing this, when it's such an advantageous group to work on. That's what I've got, fairly short and sweet at this point.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Sean, for that really engaging conversation and really making this concrete, giving folks a way to understand how this could actually be studied, analyzed, and looking at that cost-benefit analysis. And thank you, Ken, for your introduction of the user group, which is a really wonderful forum to continue this conversation. We have received quite a few questions. We have a few minutes, and we'll see how many we can get to. So the first question here is looking at the growth in DERs and the advancement in integration of DERs. Why is the focus of GETS on the transmission system? Isn't there some need to look at the distribution system as well, an application of GETS in that arena?
Yeah, James, I like the dialogue that's going on, and honestly, the distribution system is going to be just as big of a barrier to our clean energy future as the transmission system is now. So we really wanted to focus in on transmission because, for one, it's a longer lead time to build new transmission or reconductor, do things like that. So we wanted to make sure we were focusing on that big item. Yes, distribution can be long lead times, can be just as impactful to unlock some of that capacity or move power around. But it's a little bit different in terms of the technologies that you would deploy and the approaches you would take and the different entities it requires to interact with. So we wanted to focus on transmission with this study. I can kind of hear it somewhere over here of next interest in terms of a study would be digging deeper into the distribution system. So one thing I would love the user group participants to discuss is what impacts are they seeing on the distribution system? What technologies are they considering or have deployed to mitigate some of those concerns? And what is the real need in terms of research and development? You know, if we're continuing to be supported by Department of Energy and looking at the future power grid, what are the big items, those big gaps that we need to start addressing? So if distribution really is of high interest, let's talk about it in that user group and understand what are the low-hanging fruits that we should tackle right now and articulate what the solutions could be. But then also, what are the big items, the long-term items, the big concerns?
All right, thank you, Jake. Next question, another good one. Do GETs have value as alternatives to traditional upgrades in meeting NERC planning criteria, and how? Are they really just a tool for adding flexibility to operations? How are we thinking about that?
Yeah, I love this question. It's one that I've debated with many entities, mostly transmission planners, and I'll stick to what I've always said. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'll stick to what I've always said. When we consider transmission planning 20, 30 years out, do we also consider generation forecasts, load forecasts? I believe the answer is yes, right? We focus on generation and load forecast for what we're going to need in 20, 30 years. Why are we not taking that same exact approach, that same technique, and looking at what does our transmission capacity forecast look like in the next 20, 30 years? Now, some people can say climate change isn't happening and our weather patterns aren't changing, but I can tell you they are. And I can tell you that forecasting what the future environmental conditions might look like for your service territory is something absolutely you should be considering. So why not invest in that capability now, much like we forecast the annual energy production of a wind plant for the next 5, 10, 30, 40 years as we go get billions of dollars of investments? Why are we not taking that same mental approach for our transmission capacity? So to me, I think the answer is yes. And the techniques that we use to incorporate grid enhancing technologies in that long-term transmission planning is debatable. Again, I think the user group can help us understand what the challenges of including grid enhancing technologies as a long-term solution versus the benefits of including it.
Jake, let me say that a little bit more pointedly. If something has operational benefits, why would we not try to capture that in a planning environment, right? I think there's certain things we have to do in planning, totally appropriate, but we shouldn't just be planning under one circumstance, right? We should be planning across a holistic perspective. And so, like, that's on us to figure out, as a community, to figure out how to better plan for things that maybe we haven't typically looked at. But, like, man, it looks like there's operational value in these things.
Jake, I'd like to add to that a little bit. I mean, one of the big things about the GETS technology is you can get it done quicker. Planning sometimes, and especially if you're doing system upgrades, can take a long time. And I think we should be looking at GETS in a planning environment. What if it works and we don't ever have to build those new capital costs? I mean, it's an idea, and all those things. We got a lot of pressure right now with all the changes going on the grid, both transmission and distribution. We should be incorporating GETS in some of our planning work.
All right, yeah, interesting conversation, not looking at it just as a bridge technology, but one that could work in concert with those future upgrades as well, being considered in the planning environment. Another question here. PFC is a very vague term. Power flow controllers. What exactly do you mean when you call a technology a power flow controller? Are we talking about converters? Is it a switch? What is it? What's in the guts?
Yeah, I'll give the quick generic statement. This was one that we worked heavily on, and I think this is one that we worked with various vendors on as well. And we wanted to understand how to better model and how to best model in this study. It's probably not ideal the way it was included, because what we tried to do is make sure it was instrumented into the various commercial tools like TARA. Maybe what we can do is offer a more in-depth discussion on how that was specifically modeled. But Sean, maybe you've got a little bit more that we can offer in that context.
You're asking the non-electrical engineer. I can tell you that we modeled it as a phase shifting transformer across our different things. Please do not ask me follow-up questions on that. I'm the wrong guy on our team.
All right. Well, we'll follow up on that question. I think we have room for maybe one more or two. And so Jake and Sean, you kind of teased this, and so someone latched onto it. Is the data calculated for AR and DLR available to download somewhere? In addition to that, what other data is going to be made available?
Yeah, so we're in that process now of releasing the information, releasing the data sets, tying it back to publicly made available models. The difficulty in the actual power system modeling that we did in ISO New England area, some of that information is protected. The specifics of the lines or the locations and the data sets. But what we can do absolutely is make available the dynamic line rating calculations, because that is based on generic weather data. And so if we wanted to, we could work with whoever's interested in that data set. We have the ambient adjusted values, we have the dynamic line rating values, we have all sorts of different things that we could offer in that space. So if that is of extreme interest, we would love to make that type of information available, because not only did we do it for a base case scenario, we also did it for hour look aheads, 3 hour look aheads, and daily look ahead. So I know there's another question here in Slido that asks about the forecast capability. So again, we used a lot of that NOAA mesoscale, forecast model data. We ran it through our DLR calculations. So those databases, or that data set, can be made publicly available. I think what we want to make sure is it's in the right format, or it's consumable, or you have the understanding of what the value is before you run off and try and use it. So we talked about this recently, about how to or where to post that information. If people on this call have a recommendation on what's the easiest way, or what format would be most consumable or easiest to consume, let us know, because the information's there. We want to give it out. We want it to be made available. We just want to make sure it's useful.
All right, thank you so much. We are about out of time here, so we're going to try and wrap up here. And thank you so much, Jake and Sean. Thank you, Ken, for this really informative presentation and this engaging conversation that we just had. And I hope that the participants all found something that you can take home with you. And this isn't the end of it. Like Ken talked about, the user group is a wonderful place to continue that conversation. We did not get to all the questions, but an email shall be sent later on, going through the rest of those questions. And Jake, Sean, and Ken will do their best to answer those. We really do appreciate your engagement. We realize your time is valuable, and thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon, perhaps at our workshop in Denver, June 13th through 15th. Again, further information on all of our webinars, the recordings, the meetings can all be found on the ESIG website. That's www.esig.energy. under events, and we send out newsletters and informational emails. And you're all invited to attend all of these meetings. Again, thank you so much, Jake and Sean and Ken, for this very timely, very concrete, and very informative webinar. And thank you again, all of you, for your interest. We look forward to seeing you again in the very near future. In the meantime, everyone, take care, stay safe, and thank you for your participation. Thank you. Have a lovely evening and the rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.